Verbs are words that show an action or state of being. Verbs also include helping verbs such as can, must, have to, be, will, should, and could. One of the words you'll hear tossed around when talking about verbs is the word infinitive. This simply means that the verb is standing alone, not in a sentence. So an example of infinitives are to run, to give, to read, and to speak. In Pashto, verb infinitives share certain word endings, and you'll see trends and patterns among these. Also, some verb infinitives in Pashto are made from a noun or an adjective followed by the verb to do or the verb to become. Now, an example of an equivalent here is in English, the verb infinitive is to speak. But in Pashto, the equivalent is speech to do. This will become clearer as you get farther into your Pashto studies. Now, another couple of words you're going to encounter with verbs is transitive and intransitive. In Pashto, some verbs must take a direct object. These verbs are transitive. That's all that means, is a verb needs a direct object, it's transitive. An example of this is I eat food. Eat is your transitive verb that needs a direct object. That direct object is food. Other verbs in Pashto can't take a direct object, and these are called intransitive. An example of this one is she carefully listens. There is no direct object in this sentence, and the verb listens is intransitive. Some verbs are transitive in English, but not in Pashto, and vice versa. So you'll have to pay attention to these differences as you get farther into your studies. Now we're going to talk about verb tenses. Verb tenses are the different ways that verbs are used. Present simple is something used that happens regularly. Past simple is something used that happened before now. Future simple means that something will happen in the future. Now we're going to talk about progressive tenses. Present progressive indicates an ongoing action. So am, is, or are plus the verb plus ing makes present progressive tense. If I say, I am running, that's a progressive verb, a present progressive verb. Past progressive is simply an action that was ongoing in the past. So it would be the verb was or were plus the verb plus ing. The example here, I was running yesterday. Future progressive verbs are actions that will be ongoing in the future. At 9 o'clock, I will be reading. In Pashto, the formation of present simple and present progressive is the same, and the difference of the meaning isn't always clear. You'll have to pay attention closely to context to understand the difference between present simple and present progressive in Pashto. The next thing we're going to talk about is aspect. Now there is perfective and imperfective aspects, and these are related to the difference between simple and progressive tenses. A perfective aspect refers to a single action that was, is, or will be completed. A one-time action. Imperfective aspect refers to a regular, ongoing, or open-ended action. The difference between the two aspects is more prominent in Pashto than English and affects the way verbs are formed and used in sentences. Next, we'll talk about sentences. There are several types of sentences you want to be familiar with. Demonstrative sentences are statements of fact or presumed fact. Imperative sentences are commands. Interrogative sentences are simply questions. And compound sentences link two different ideas. In Pashto, understanding the types of sentences will help you understand the way subjects and verbs change for those sentences. Now in English, we have a pretty basic sentence structure. We have a subject plus a verb when no object is needed. For example, I run. I is the subject, run is the verb. There's also subject plus verb plus complement. I sit in the chair. The complement gives more info about where I sit. I am watching television. I is the subject, am watching makes up my verb. Television is my direct object. We also have subject plus verb plus direct object plus indirect object. I am giving a gift to Cindy. I is my subject. Am giving is the verb. A gift is the direct object. To Cindy is the indirect object. Of course, English sentences can get much more complex than this, but we're just trying to get our feet up under us for the basics of grammar. Now, basic Pashto structure differs from basic English sentence structure. In Pashto, you can have a subject plus a verb where no object is needed. You can have a subject plus a complement plus a verb. Here the difference is the verb ends the sentence. This is a major rule in Pashto that the verb almost always ends the sentence. You can have a subject plus a direct object plus a verb. A subject plus a direct object plus an indirect object plus a verb, or vice versa, flipping the direct and indirect object. So subject, indirect object, direct object, and verb. Like English, Pashto sentences can get much more complex, but for right now, the main thing you need to remember is the verb ends the sentence in Pashto. It comes last. Now here's a note on the subjects of Pashto sentences. In Pashto, the verb ending changes depending on who is doing an action. Pashto speakers do not always include a noun or pronoun as the subject of their sentences. In Pashto, the verb ending implies who or what the subject is, and this often makes the use of pronouns unnecessary. So an example of an equivalent, in English, I say, I am going to the store. But in Pashto, they would simply say, to store, go. The way that they end that verb go will indicate that I is the subject. Again, you'll learn more about this later. Just remember, the verb ending indicates the subject. Next, we'll talk about interrogatives, or questions. Yes and no questions are formed like statements in Pashto, but they're spoken with a different tone. So you'll have to listen carefully to understand whether a Pashtun is asking a question or making a statement. Questions which use a question word, like who, what, when, where, why, and others, usually have that word at the beginning. But sometimes the question word is placed immediately before the verb instead of at the beginning of the sentence. An example of this. In English we say, "Who are you calling?" But in Pashto they would say, "Who you call?" Or they would say, "You, who call?" The end? No, this is just the beginning. Pashto is a unique language, and there are equivalents between English grammar and Pashto grammar, but you must remember that there isn't always an equivalent to English in Pashto. So some things you're going to have to take on the understanding that they're simply different languages. But those things that you can find equivalents, understanding English grammar will help you better understand many parts of Pashto grammar.